This is Kim on Ramblings with Kim, and today I am very excited to bring to you a new type of political candidate that I hope you enjoy just as much as I do. His name is Kolten Montgomery. He's running for Colorado State Representative in House District 21, which covers Security, Fountain, and Widefield, and parts of Fort Carson. He and I bumped into each other on Twitter, as one does in this day and age. We did not get off to a good start. However, it didn't take us long to realize that we had basically the same ideology. And that's very unusual when it comes to politics. It's also very unusual for me to say, I endorse you. And good or bad, he's someone that you need to watch out for. I think he can go all the way, and I mean all the way to the White House. He's young, he's spirited, he's got an amazing platform. And if you listen to what he has to say, I think you will be just as moved by him as I am. So let's get this started. As I learned, let's fucking go. Thank you for taking some time to sit down and talk with me.
Of course.
Because it was so great to talk to you the other weekend. I've been, of course, rambling to all my friends
That's awesome.
about
It
you.
helps.
Because I just do that. And of course, I've been talking to Gordon about you. That's been a really great thing because you're the type of candidate that he would really be interested in. But before we get started, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you are, what you're running for, or I can go ahead and do it, but that's completely up to you.
Either way works. For those that don't know, my name is Kolten Montgomery. I'm running for the Colorado State House of Representatives down here in House District 21, and most people don't know. Well, most sane people don't know House District numbers, especially in a statewide race. So, House District 21 is Fountain Valley, Security, Widefield areas, and then it does have a very large portion of Fort Carson in it as well. But in the weirdest gerrymandering I think I've ever seen, it doesn't have any of like the residential parts of Fort Carson. So it's like the entire base, like 90% of the base, but then all the houses are in another district. I'm like, oh, that's convenient, thank you. So, but with that being said, I mean, obviously Fountain and Security and Widefield are home to such a huge military population. There's a lot of first responders that live here, a lot of government employees, private contractors, and also a pretty significant retirement community as well. And for those who don't know, Fountain is just kind of like the southern tip Fountain, Widefield, and Security are all kind of one area, except that Fountain is its own city, but they're really just the southern tip of Colorado Springs. So you go like 2 minutes south of Colorado Springs, and there's Fountain and Security and Widefield right there. So yeah, I'm running for the State House of Representatives. I'm 24 years old. You have to, before someone asks, yes, you have to be 25 to serve in the State House of Representatives, but that's by the time that you would be elected, or the time of election, which is in November, and my birthday's in September. So yeah, I'll be fine. But I am running as a Democratic candidate against a Republican incumbent. And I am one of the, crazy progressive candidates who probably says a lot of stuff I shouldn't say, but I say it anyway. That's just what I do. A little bit of background on me. I'm openly gay. I'm a big pit bull owner. I love putting that out there because as people who own pit bulls, we're our own, breed of person. So I have my own little pity. As I said, I am openly gay, which is awesome to be running in, as a young gay candidate in this part of Colorado that everyone, including the Democratic Party especially, has been like, no, that's a lost cause. Like all those old retired conservatives, you're never gonna win. And I'm like, okay, well, and it's not even about winning. It's about getting the message out there and proving that people like me, people like us, we do still exist. We are out here, especially with all the decisions that we're seeing coming down from the Supreme Court. I mean, I was talking to a coworker about that today. We've all been focused on Roe v. Wade, which is obviously a horrible ruling by the Supreme Court. But people are forgetting all of these other rulings that have been coming out. That just kind of got hidden in that. There was a whole stack of rulings from the Supreme Court that came out, and everyone focused on this one, which is obviously a huge problem. But not many people are talking about the fact that cops don't have to read you your Miranda rights anymore. There's so many things that are happening and that are on the chopping block, and I think this is really the time for more younger generation candidates, whether they're progressive or even I even know some younger conservatives who really want to run for office, but they're more they're not Democrats, they are conservative, but they are against the the MAGA Trump forces within their own party, and they're trying to say, hey, we're not all crazy. There are still pro-choice Republicans. There are Republicans who don't hate gays. And I always say, and being such a progressive candidate myself, I always get that, because what do Democrats and Republicans do all day? We just talk about how the other side sucks, right? That's what we do. So, I mean, and for me being as progressive as I am, very progressive, very to the left, right up there with Bernie Sanders sometimes, and, even with all of that, I'm still one of the first people to say, no, let's not say all conservatives, let's not say all Republicans. I put a tweet up a few days ago, I think it was, and I just kind of made that point that I don't even see Trump Republicans or Trump supporters as conservatives, because they're not conservatives, right? Conservatism is a legitimate political philosophy, and it serves a purpose just like anything else does, right? And there's nothing wrong with people who are restraining us a little bit, constraining us a little bit from moving too fast forward, right? Because someone like me, I want universal health care tomorrow, right? I want it right now. I want it to happen. But at the same time, with that balancing act, which is how the democratic system of government is supposed to work in the first place, we have more of that push and pull, and that's how we actually get things done, reach compromise, make sure that all interested parties are accounted for, and yada yada. That was a really long intro, but yeah, I'm running down here in House District 21. I guess a tiny little background on me. I was a detention deputy sheriff, which meant that I was in the jail, the detention center for Pueblo County. I did that for a year. And then currently I work in asset protection, which is also what I had done before becoming a deputy sheriff. So I'm one of the few young progressives who's not out there saying F the police, and I'm actually very pro law enforcement, even though at the same time I understand there is so much reform that needs to happen in the criminal justice system overall. I would say, just to kind of sum up my intro, I'm just sick of all the political games that both sides play, and that's every faction and every party. But it's just it's the finger pointing game, and it's the in group and the out group, and it's not getting us anywhere as a society. And if you ask me, that's one of the reasons that someone like Trump and people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Colorado's Lauren Boebert and these nut jobs were able to get into office. And these congressional office used to be held in such high esteem, right? The presidency used to be held in such high esteem, and now we see what's happening. And I think what people fail to realize is that, in my opinion, that's just as much the fault of a lot of Democrats as it is the Republicans who put him in office. And I also think it's worth noting that I am a former Republican. I was a Republican when I was like 15 to 18. I turned 18 and I was like, oh my God, it was in 2016. So Trump's the whole battle is starting over whether or not Trump is going to get the nomination. And I was so excited because I had just turned 18. I'm like, I'm a registered voter. I'm a Republican. Oh my God. I had been in all these, I had been, helping the old state representative, Lois Landgraf, who did hold this seat, and she was a Republican, and I knew everyone in the Republican Party. I was pre-registered Republican, everything. And, the moment I turned 18 and election cycle ran around, I was like, I'm going to be a delegate. So I was a delegate to I was an alternate delegate to the state assembly, and I was a full delegate to the county and congressional and judicial district assemblies, where for a lot of people who aren't familiar with Colorado's system, or it's really hard to be familiar with unless you've actually participated in it, the whole caucus and assembly system. And even those of us who have participated in it multiple times still don't understand half of it. But from doing that, I was actually in a position as this brand new, newly minted 18-year-old young Republican to be voting for national delegates from the Republican Party, who would then go to the national delegation, and they would cast their vote for Trump or one of the other candidates. And I was a firm never Trumper, and we had it was so interesting to see, and I still look back on it fondly today, even though yes, we lost, but the resistance that we put up, the fight that we put up, the coalition that we built, that was people from all across the state, and it was so interesting because it was evangelical, conservative Christians, moderate Republicans, left-leaning Republicans. It was former Democrats. It was such an interesting mix, an interesting coalition, and I say we lost, but in Colorado we actually won. In Colorado, we elected a full slate of national delegates that were firmly anti-Trump, and it didn't get much news coverage, but when the national convention did happen, Colorado voted against Trump completely, and most of the delegation, once he was nominated, most of the Colorado Republican delegation actually threw their credentials on the ground and walked out. So I think that's a thing that we forget to understand, is that they're not all bad and they're not all evil, and I still have many friends from those days on a national level. I have friends in Texas. I have friends all over the country that were in on that fight within the Republican Party. And after Trump got nominated, most of us left. And I'm not going to say I became a Democrat, because I didn't. I became an unaffiliated voter. And I became a Democrat last year when I decided that I was going to run for this seat. And, I decided this is the party that I need to run for. I'm obviously not running as a Republican with how leftist I am. But I think my story just goes to show that you don't have to be stuck in one line of thought for your entire life, and especially I think that's how people get trapped on both sides of the aisle too. I think it's how they get trapped in this hyper partisan party over everything else type mentality, is that they're just like, well, these are my principles and this is what I believe and that's it. I'm never going to question it. Screw you. That's the whole conversation. So I really think as a society, we need to start having more tough conversations, and we need to start making more people uncomfortable. And I think Roe v. Wade is a great example of that, right? One of the first things we did to kind of launch my campaign was have a protest at the Fountain City Hall for abortion rights, which had everyone was like, oh my God, Fountain? Like, that's such a concern. Like, oh, we're going to get shot, dude. And I was like, no, we'll be fine. And it actually went so well that at the end of the protest, everyone was, coming to me like, we did not expect this type of reception. We had people honking, we had people yelling, and, how they were supportive of us. And I just said, this goes to show there are a lot more of us than meets the eye. And that there are always more of us than there are of them. And when I say them, I don't mean Republicans. I don't mean conservatives. I mean, the entrenched political special interest corporate bought out class, right? And that's what I'm seeing. More and more candidates are starting to come out of the woodwork, especially younger candidates, and stand up against just this entrenched political class that we've had for a century or more, right? And I think that there's a lot to be accomplished, and it's not about, obviously if you're running for office you want to win. It'd be nice if I won, that'd be pretty cool, but at the same time that's not what I'm running for. I'm running to really show that there are progressive voices still, and that young people can show up, and if anything, you know, at the smallest level, to give people that little bit of motivation, you know, to come out and be like, yeah, I can change as a person, I can evolve as a person, I can evolve politically and philosophically and religiously, and that's okay. And I think that what, you know, the biggest thing that happens where people get stuck in these old, outdated mindsets is that they never take that step to be in uncomfortable situations or have uncomfortable conversations. So, yeah, I guess that's my really elongated intro, but there we go.
Thankfully, not getting shot in fountain.
Right.
Yes, because they did bomb the Planned Parenthood
Right.
in Colorado Springs. And people tend to kind of gloss over that sometimes, unfortunately. And I think you'll find down there that there is a large variety of people. As I told you, my ex-husband had a house down there, Green Beret, super liberal,
Right.
from the Pacific Northwest, and he would be voting for you hands down. I mean, he's a Bernie supporter.
Awesome.
So he's even more liberal than I am.
Right.
Because I'm like, Bernie, if you want to run as a Democrat, then you need to call yourself a Democrat.
Right.
You don't get to be an independent and then say, oh, no, I'm going to be a Democrat now. No. That doesn't work that way. No.
Right.
But you're doing what I tell so many younger people to do, which is if you want to change the way things are, you need to start now.
Right.
And you need to start soon. And I have been saying this for so long. And for some reason, I cannot get any of my children to do this. I think they're afraid because of what I do. So I really applaud you on going out there and doing that, because I think that if the military would get past that one, well, there's two bias. One, as you mentioned at the very beginning, and two, just the word Democrat. You know, they don't want to hear that word. So, and we need the energy and vitality from the younger generation to go out there and really shake things up.
Right.
And it's also like, so I guess I should start at the beginning, because you and I met on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I'm like, hey, dude, seriously, if you want to behave that way, you know, then that's fine. But then the party's not going to back you. So
Right.
Fine, whatever. Get off I'm not talking to you anymore, whatever. No, I mean, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that I wasn't talking to you. I was just like, if you're going to be like this, it's, you know, the party doesn't have to give you any money. They don't have to if you don't want to behave along their lines.
Right.
And me, you know, being 55 and as I told you before, with growing up in politics with my grandmother, who was a staunch Democrat, and they were farmers that ended up building a small fortune on basically construction with my father, and that's how they went along doing that. But you would never have known the kind of money that they had anywhere along the way. And she just felt the need to try and make things better for people, for anyone. And so, like I told you, she'd write a letter every day to someone. I don't know who they were, but Like, she'd have Christmas cards from every president, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Grandma, I'm sure at the White House that, you're on some FBI warrant list or something.
Something.
I know. So I just grew up thinking this,
Right.
and I wanted to go into politics, and my dad looked at me and he goes, "You can't be president." And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Because you're a girl." And I just went, "Okay, so what you're saying is my dumbass brother, who's not as smart as I am,
Right.
can be president." Okay, well, we proved that's true now.
Yeah, that's fair. We did.
We've now proved that the dumbass brother can be president, but
Right.
the smart sister can't. So I don't know what to tell you. So I guess that's fair for my dad to have said that. But anyway, so I was going through, and like I said, I like talked your ear off the entire time we were talking. But you do make a case for the fact that things do need to change. As I've told my husband, I've gotten to the point where I'm almost afraid it's too late for things to change.
Right.
That it's something that, you really want good people in there like you. But are we too late?
Right.
And that worries me. I mean, now we have people like Boebert that are wanting to defund the FBI.
Yeah.
They didn't want to defund the police, but they wanted to fund the FBI.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. What?
Right.
What alternate universe do we all live in? I don't understand this anymore. I told Gordon, I said, I'm going to Mexico. I understand gangs.
You're like, at least that makes sense.
Exactly. Okay, you didn't sell enough drugs this month, they're going to kill you. All right, fine. But now we want to keep the police but defund the FBI? No, I give up.
Right. Yeah. It's all that thin blue line stuff, but then they are complete, they were the first people to be violently assaulting and trying to murder Capitol police officers, and they are regularly known for shooting police officers on the streets, with the entire sovereign citizens movement and the militias that are out there. And if there ever was a domestic terror threat to the country, it's these people. And I'm not saying all Trumpers, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Right. There's a hardcore in there.
Right.
And for those that don't say something to them,
Mm-hmm.
they're just enabling their behavior. And that's part of the problem
Yeah.
that we have.
Yep.
And of course, I always use my voice. But I told Gordon, I said, I'm somewhat afraid in this town to kind of stand up and say, no, you guys are crazy.
Right.
Because everybody, I mean, I told you that, I had to put on private that when I talked about my husband
Mm-hmm.
being killed overseas, because I started having people attacking me over that.
Yeah.
And then I had people attacking me about, because you had mentioned something about guns, and I was trying to rationally explain guns, and then I just gave up and started irrationally explaining guns, because it's like, okay, whatever.
Right.
You don't want to listen, let's just call it what it is. You guys are just crazy then. Fine, I give up.
Right.
So I know that you are for, of course, sensible. I mean, sensible gun control, which I wish the whole entire country could just understand.
Right.
This a sensible, which is what I was trying to explain to this one individual, the background checks. And then the person falls through the cracks of the background check. And then they create, then they mass murder.
Right.
And these mass murders are generally white males. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for me to say that because I do have a son,
right,
who is the most gentle person in the world. But still, you don't want to have to stereotype somebody or a group. But you see it time and time again. And you have to wonder, why is this happening?
Right.
And what can we do about it? Because I don't believe, I know what happened as far as the NRA and how it expanded upon their gun rights. But we don't want to have to tell people that they don't get to have a gun at all.
Right.
We just want them to not kill our kids while they're going to school.
Right.
And so what is your plan as far as gun safety? Because that's more important than actually gun control or gun regulation. It's more gun safety.
Right. Well, I mean, you put my platform pretty well in your own words. But I am, I always say all the time, and it honestly, it pisses Democrats and my fellow progressives off all the time, but I don't care. I am pro Second Amendment, 100%. I'm pro Second Amendment, but I'm pro Second Amendment as the Second Amendment actually reads, and and everyone else would be like, well, it says well-regulated militia, and the only well-regulated militia is the National Guard. I'm like, well, yes and no. That argument can go in so many different ways, but at the end of the day, we have to look at it as, yes, we have police that are, there in civilian society to protect us, but at the same time, no citizen should be forced to rely solely on the protection of a police force. It's more of a resource than anything, and we can't expect people to not defend themselves, not defend their property, not defend their homes, their children, their families, their pets. We can't expect people to not defend what is theirs, because there are people out there who are genuine menaces to society. There are. I've seen them. We they exist, and so I think when we look at and you said gun safety, and I think that's a great way to put it as well. Everyone wants to say gun control or gun regulation, and it just it's a bad narrative. It creates a bad narrative, and I think that a lot of those within our own party in several different parts of our party have just screwed the messaging on it. I even see very, very centrist, moderate Democrats, of which I am not one, but they'll come out all the time, and I've literally seen them come out and basically just say that anyone who owns a gun is, excuse my language, but inherently a piece of shit, right? They're basically like, if you own a gun, you're a trash human, your ego's huge, and you're afraid of everything, and I'm like, that's not true, right? Like, you don't get to take a vast portion of American society and be like, okay, well, you're all just pieces of shit because you have a gun. That's no.
Right.
Our culture, and whether it's right or wrong, I mean, I think that, yeah, ideally, we wouldn't have had such a gun-centered culture, where there's almost a gun in every home, but that's where we're at. So
Right.
now, when people come out and they're like, "Oh, just seize all the guns," I'm like, no, that's Jesus. That's how you get a civil war. Okay, you think Trump was
Yeah.
bad? You don't know. And yes, that would be a constitutional violation in my opinion. It would be. And it's not even
Yes.
because of what the Second Amendment reads, even though yes, it would be there too. But it's the inherent natural right to defend oneself and one's property. So, like I was saying, when it comes to gun safety, really what I'd like to see is we need to have enhanced background checks. We need to have mandated training, mandated licensure, insurance, things of that nature. It should not be harder to get and register a vehicle or get your driver's license than it is to get a lethal weapon. And yes, the argument can be made, and it's true. Yes, a vehicle can 100% be a lethal weapon, but not near it. That's not its sole purpose, right? And
Right.
the damage that one gun can inflict is in my opinion much more than a single vehicle, right? It's especially when you get
Yes.
into ARs and things of that nature. And I'll be the first one to say yes, I am a gun owner. I'm a proud gun owner, but I've went through the training. I've went, and mine was law enforcement level training and certification to be able to carry that as a duty weapon. And then, of course, I took that training and I rolled that over into getting my concealed handgun permit, which I proudly have. I'll show it to anyone who wants to see it. But
Right.
with that being said, I don't like this idea that, well, it's America, so I just have an inherent right to walk down Main Street with an RPG and into the Starbucks because that's my right. I'm like, no, you're a douchebag. That's the problem. Like, it's not.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with your rights. Those people, yes, there's something wrong with you, right? If you're someone
Right.
who feels the need to take an AR-15, a loaded AR-15 into Walmart just to make a political
Right.
statement, I'm sorry, but you are the exact kind of person that should not own a gun. Because obviously something is going on psychologically that is not. You should not be in possession of a lethal weapon, and you should probably be in a mental asylum somewhere. So,
Yeah.
and that's something I think. Obviously we have this inherent right to defend ourselves. I do believe we have an inherent right to have firearms, especially in the modern age. I think it would be not only immoral and unethical, but just unlawful and unconstitutional for, even the most liberal, most progressive of governments to come out and say, we're taking all your guns and you no longer have a right to defend yourself, just call the police. No, that's wrong, right?
Right.
But at the same time, yes, you should be able to own a firearm. You should be able to own a gun. But if you want to, just like if you want to drive a car, you have to take the test and study the things and carry insurance legally. It should be the same with guns. And I think that a way to sell this to the sensible gun owners, like myself, like yourself, is to say carrying insurance and carrying licensure and having mandated training, that is not in any way a bad thing, right? At all.
Right.
First off, the insurance protects you. That's
Yes.
It protects you. So not only
Right.
that's a big thing with people who conceal carry as well. Even the NRA has a lot of insurance programs for concealed carrier. Yeah, I don't have them because I hate the NRA, but they don't. So it's funny
Yes.
to see even the most conservative gun rights activists and lobbies who are like, "Hey, do you need? You should probably buy our concealed carry insurance because if you shoot someone, even if it was completely legal and it was, as we would say, a good shoot, and completely justifiable, you're gonna still go to court, most likely still get arrested, and you need to have that legal representation there, and you need to know your rights." I'm like, so what exactly is the issue with saying that you're going to be protected legally and have a resource to turn to if you, God forbid, get in a deadly force situation? And that's another thing I want to touch on is from being in law enforcement. And I wasn't in law enforcement for a long period of time, but just to get that firearm certification, there's a lot of training on the weapon itself, right? I remember just in my certification week, or my qualification, that's what we call it. So for my quals, we would put, I want to say anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 rounds through that weapon in that 1 week. And so not only are you insanely familiar with your weapon and how that operates, you're very familiar with how to clean it, how to maintain it, how to operate it, where's the safety, making sure that your finger isn't in the trigger guard unless you are actively pointed down range and about to discharge a round, right? Ensuring that you know how to safely draw that weapon, depending on what level of retention holster you have. There's so many specifics that go into actually understanding the huge amount of liability that comes with having that lethal weapon in your possession. And, and with that as well comes the articulation for when and where and how to use deadly force, right? And I doubt hardly any of this gun rights lobby could accurately detail to anyone what would justify a deadly force situation, right? Because it's a lot more complicated than people think, especially from the law enforcement perspective. There's a lot more factors that go into play that people don't even think. They're just like, well, I got my gun on me, so if something happens, I'll shoot him. I'm like, no, that's not how it is, right? You have to understand, and I carry regularly. Whenever I put my weapon in my holster, I've already, my mindset changes. And I'm already, now everything I do, and I mean every single thing I do, is surrounded around having that. And knowing if, when, how I'm going to use it. And doing everything that I possibly can to mitigate never having to use that. Because that's not something that any reasonable or sane person wants to have to resort to. So I think when it comes to gun safety, we need to have more regulations in place, but we also need to change the narrative. We need to make it clear we're not coming after your guns. Nobody's coming after your guns. All we're saying is, here's the training, here's the licensure. We'll make it free, for God's sake. I don't care, but here's the training, right. Here's the licensure, here's the insurance, here's what we expect. And Colorado's a really weird state for this because, you can openly carry in Colorado without anything, any permit, nothing, doesn't matter. You're above 21, open carry all day, doesn't matter. But to conceal carry a weapon, which is as simple as, if I have a holster on me and my shirt's not covering it, I'm open carrying. I'm protected under Colorado law. The moment I conceal that in any reasonable way, I just put my shirt over it. Now I'm concealed carrying. Now I need to have the permit, which I do have. But when you look at that, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. You still have a gun. It doesn't. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. So I think that's. I think we need to normalize that progressives and Democrats and people of all walks of life, gay people, women, African Americans, Latinos, everyone has an inherent right to protect themselves, and people in every group imaginable own guns. And there's nothing inherently wrong with owning a gun at all. And I know a lot of people that, they don't have their concealed carry permit, but they don't open carry either. They're, kind of the same situation as you. It's just in the home, unlocked. A lot of times the ammo's next to it or stored separately or whatever. And it's just, the last case scenario, home invasion, burglary type, I need to defend myself and my family. That's perfectly fine. And I think narrative-wise, we need to talk to those people, and we need to talk to sensible gun owners, because we have entirely allowed the Republican Party and, especially the crazy, just right-wing militia types, we have completely allowed them to control this narrative so that they are able to shut us down. And this is just one of many issues we've allowed them to just hijack the narrative from us on. But it gets to the point where the discussion can't even happen, because we're just trying to attack people who own guns, and not us, but as a party, a lot of times we're just trying to attack people that own guns instead of saying, wait, I own one, like, here it is. Boebert thinks she looks cool, I can beat Boebert, but and I think it's just being willing to change that narrative and talk to people as people and say, I'm not in any way trying to say that you don't have a right to defend yourself. Of course you do. Let me help you find a concealed carry class. Let me give you some tips and advice. Let me show you the insurance carrier I use. Stuff like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think there are a ton of Democrats and progressives and libertarians and centrist conservatives who are all on the same line with that. And I get that all the time in my campaign, where people are like, hey, you were a cop, so you're probably a very, conservative Democrat. I'm like, actually, no. I'm really, like, all the way over here left. But I love guns. And they're like, wait a minute, what? And then, that's already a whole conversation. But I get that feedback all the time from people who are like, wait a minute, they'll be like, I'm so progressive, or I'm such a loyal, avid member of the Democratic Party, but I hate this messaging on guns, because I hate seeing these people and these candidates go out there and just basically insult all gun owners. And I think that's, even if that's not our purpose, and I don't think that's the purpose a lot of times, but we've allowed Republicans to hijack that narrative so effectively on this and so many other issues that, a Democrat can come out and be like, hey, gun control is not a bad idea, and immediately, the Republicans just destroy them with, oh, they're coming after you. They're coming after you, Susie, like you middle-aged housewife. You know that gun that you have to defend your kids if a rapist breaks in? Nope. Sorry. Call the cops. Their response time's like 2 hours. Have fun. And, Democrats are just sitting here like, what happened? But we're not fighting back. We're not having that conversation of, no, nobody said that. First of all, let's go to the range right now and see who outshoots who. But it's
right.
And obviously guns are a very sensitive issue, but and more and more so by candidates on the right. We're seeing them being used as more political props than anything, right? And if I take enough really bad pictures with, this gun on my hip and another one on my other hip and one on my leg and then an AR-15 and then a grenade launcher on my back, everyone's just going to be like, oh my God, total badass. And it's like, no, you're not. And
no,
and the way I look at it too, just to kind of sum everything up, is that kind of, so, I mean, if you look at something this is just me being a nerd, but if you look at, more ancient societies, like look at the warrior classes of ancient societies, where the idea of being a warrior was an entire philosophy, it was an entire way of life, it was a discipline, right? And you look at, say, the samurai or the Roman legionaries, or, just the Spartans, for example, and you look at that philosophical relationship that was built into, even the Marines do it, and here in this country, it's
Yes.
that relationship to, this is my weapon, and it's almost this very strong philosophy of, this is not just my weapon, like this is everything it represents, the power that this holds, but the liability that comes with this, the responsibility that comes with this, the ability to inflict so much damage, but having the choice of whether I inflict it or not, or where I inflict it, right? And I think that's how I've always viewed guns. And that's why I think it's very, very disrespectful for people on both sides to use guns as props. And I'm not, trying to be a crazy person, like, worship your gun like a samurai sword. No. Yeah. But what I am saying is you have to look at that as not just the tool, but what it represents, right? And I think that's, conservatives, Republicans, I should say, that typical messaging is, no, guns are just a tool. It's the, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And it's like, well, if a person uses a gun to kill someone, no, the gun didn't do it, because the gun isn't a living object, but it was the tool that facilitated that happening in the first place, right? So, just being able to say it's not about it just being a gun. It's about, obviously it's a tool, obviously it's just an item, but it's not a prop either. And there's an entire long list of responsibilities and ethics and a whole morality argument that comes with having one and owning one, and God forbid having to, use one against another person. So I think that's something that we need to focus more on, just as a society overall, especially as the Democratic Party, as members of our community as well, is just changing that narrative and saying, of course you have a right to defend yourself. Nobody is challenging that. And if they are, they're an idiot. I mean, obviously right. You have a right to defend yourself, but let's talk about how you can defend yourself in the most ethical and the most safe manner possible, and I think that we've allowed that messaging to get way too far away from us.
I look back to growing up, and of course, my family hunted.
Right.
And um, so, my dad had a 22 and a 30-06, and then he eventually bought my brother a BB gun. And I never figured this out because I'm like a bigger tomboy than my brother, and he got all this cool stuff, and I'm
Right.
like, yeah, but what about me? And so he taught us how to use a 22 and how to use it safely and how to load it and how to clean it and how he took us out to shoot and do all this. And then we got the BB gun, and that was really cool, and we'd play with it in the backyard. Well, then my brother would take it out and he would just shoot animals, and my dad got very upset, and he was like, no, you use this to just target practice. You shoot the animals, then you're going to eat them. That's what that's for. You don't get to just shoot arbitrarily. That if you're going to shoot something, you're going to eat it. Well, then my brother wasn't going to shoot the squirrels or the birds or the anything that looked like, these little things, because he didn't want to eat those. And it put a stop to it really quickly. And I've seen how, a household, and we're talking, because it was eons ago. So this was, the 70s. And we've seen from the 70s, you would never have seen anybody with an automatic weapon, or even in my community, I can't even think. I think Gordon has a Glock or something like that. It's all hunting weapons. That's all they were just hunting weapons. And when he would leave town, he would tell my mother, he'd load the gun for her and tell her, just, step outside the bedroom, just shoot, and that will do enough damage that you won't have to worry about anyone else, you won't have to worry about that person anymore. And then I would spend the entire week, because my bedroom was at the end there, right next to the bathroom, not leaving my bedroom because I was afraid my mother was going to shoot me. Besides the fact that she's a little bit crazy. I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to do this. Right. So I've watched us evolve from that kind of a society to where we are now, that I know from a psychological standpoint, from studies being done, and this I kind of want to roll into your mental health as well, because I pulled up some articles that firearms that you have in the house are more often used. They are more often used on you or a family member, right, as opposed to saving you from some unknown person that might be breaking into the house.
Right.
And now we have these studies that have they finally have just come out in the last month or two, where our suicide for the veterans, our suicide rates have gone up 10%. And most of them have been from firearms.
Right.
And so now we have a link between the two. And I get where they still want that connection between what they felt that they were when they were in the military, so they want
right,
a gun with them. But the minute that they're talking about possibly doing something with, not even with a gun, but just thinking about killing themselves, someone needs to be able to say, okay, we're going to remove this from the house until we can do something about this. And that I see, and I hate to say it because in your district, I hate to say that's a removing from the house issue, but you want to save the person. And I would rather the person hate me because I took their gun for 2 months until they were able to get, the help that they needed and were able to get talked down and to get, back on track. And then you're like, here's your gun,
Right.
you're doing great.
Exactly.
And that is very personal to me because I will tell you, this story I've told very few people. I don't think I told you this. My ex-husband was sitting in his garage, and my two youngest girls were with him at the time. And Sadie, my youngest, is autistic, and I believe she was 12 or 13, and my middle girl was like 16. And he was sitting in the garage. Oh, funny story. He married a Russian who he met at a bar from his informant.
Right.
So she was messing with him, and he wasn't much older than our oldest daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So he was drunk, and he had a gun, and he was threatening to kill himself. And of course, the girls are crying and going crazy and not knowing what to do. And finally, they call my oldest daughter and give her the phone, and she's able to talk him down from this situation.
Right.
But he nearly killed himself with a gun in front of his daughters.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here going, where was the person that I was married to?
Right.
And why I just don't see that as being a responsible gun owner anymore.
Right.
Now he and I are not close like we used to be, so I don't know what kind of help you may or may not have gotten. But
Right.
those are the kind of situations that I'm really worried about. And I mean, because you've got such a large military base down there that we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to let our veterans down.
Right.
And it's not just guns. I mean, the majority of the suicides are guns, but
Right.
they need mental health services, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that's kind of what I was coming up with. Again, I'm rambling. So what do you think regarding because you talk a little bit about mental health and on your platform?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, or I know, honestly, overall, that mental health is it's a huge problem, and a lot of people like to say, oh, well, why is mental health such a big thing now? Is it, it's part of the whole woke generation type thing, everyone needs their safe space or whatever, and that's not true, right? Mental health was always a problem.
Yes.
But there are, and as well as I do, there's so many studies that just the modern contemporary age itself, the pop culture, social media, the social media platforms like TikTok and Snapchat, where everything's photo or video, nothing gets deleted anymore, right? Blackmail and scams and all that are at their highest, and these are just examples, but basically we know for a fact that just modern society itself, one of the side effects of living in such a pop culture, everything constantly connected world and society, that has led to a lot of severe mental health problems. And when it comes to the military as well, it's so unfortunate to see how the military does, almost next to nothing mental health wise for a lot of their active duty personnel and everything. And it's the same in law enforcement. And that's something I want to touch on as well. And it's the same for a lot of just government public sector employees, but especially first responders and especially military, that there's such this this stigma against it. If you were to go to, in a police department or in the military, to go to your commanding officer and say, hey, I'm having suicidal thoughts, like I need help. The first thought is, oh God, you're a liability, and then they find a way to get you out of there, right? So the military just discharges people and gives them some really bad help and no medication and kicks them to the curb. They hit the civilian world, they don't know what to do, and yeah, they end up either being one of the homeless veterans on the street, or they experience a complete mental break, or they do end up finding a way to kill themselves, and they fully carry it out. And a lot of times that ends up being unfortunately, active shooter situations, suicide by cop, domestic violence situations. We literally just, and I don't know the specifics, but we literally just had a domestic violence situation down in Security Widefield, where the deputy was killed. So the male had originally shot his wife, I believe it was, and killed her. When responding, I believe it was two deputies and Fountain Police, when they arrived coming to the shots fired call, he immediately opened fire and killed one of the deputies. And, he ended up taking his own life because that's what they always do. But,
Right.
There's so many issues here that we just don't want to talk about because they are uncomfortable and they are hard. And, kind of just touching on mental health in general, we desperately need more government intervention. And I know how people just hate hearing, the government's coming to save the day, but the government has a lot more resources than you do. So,
Right.
At the end of the
Right.
day, we need to be, and if the federal government isn't going to do it, which they're not going to do anytime soon for our military personnel, then the state needs to step up with such a high, the high military presence and population that we have here, both retired and active and reserve and guard. We need to step up on behalf of our first responders and law enforcement, police, fire, paramedics. We need to step up on behalf of our military and veterans, and we need to actually provide those resources free of charge. And we need to, combine that with not only, counseling and therapy and psychiatry and psychology and things of that nature and all the different methods that go into a truly therapeutic approach, but we also need to be, having that accessibility to medication and to, helping people through these situations. And, when we talk about mental health, and this is where it gets unpopular for a lot of people, right? When we talk about mental health, we're not just talking about mental health, right? Mental health a lot of times is a symptom of larger problems, right? So I'm sure a lot of people have seen the meme. It's actually one of my favorites, but it basically, I can't remember it verbatim, but basically saying the reason that we have one of the many reasons that we have so many huge mental health problems in this generation is because we're basically living in a late stage capitalist hellscape. So, it's like, but when you think of it, you're like, oh my God, but that actually makes sense, right? The monotony of these jobs that pay people poorly, treat people horribly, don't offer benefits, and that's public as well as private. It's everybody, right? And so then we get into there's so many different categories in play here. If someone gets diagnosed with a terminal illness or they experience a traumatic injury or something of that nature, and then they have 100,000 in medical bills to pay, yeah, their mental health is going to fall off a cliff, obviously. And it's the same with people who experience homelessness, or people who maybe aren't even, they're not on the streets homeless, but they're facing eviction. They're facing, the landlords and corporate interests in housing. They keep constantly raising rents again and again and again. And a lot of them are trying to price people out so they can sell that property to developers and things of that nature. Or they just want more money because they can, because this is the market to do it, right? So and that's where, mental health becomes more than just mental health. And mental health is a lot of times a symptom. It's a side effect of larger systemic issues that we need to be addressing. But now that I went off on my spiel about that, my little rant, some of the things, legislatively, one of the first things that I would absolutely love to introduce and get accomplished, and I feel that we could certainly get bipartisan support on it, is addressing first responder access to mental health care. And in doing that, I think we need to protect all public employees, and I think we need to have actual legal workforce protections for them based on mental health. We shouldn't have police officers who've spent, say, 15, 20 years on the streets and seen absolutely horrible, horrendous things. And by the way, many of them are former military as well. And they've seen all these things. And then one day they start to, everything's creeping up and they start to experience that long-term PTSD that they've always had. But now the symptoms are showing. And now they're having suicidal thoughts and ideation. And now they're having anxiety and depression. And now they're having manic episodes. And, they don't feel like they can tell anyone about that, because then they're going to lose their job. And that should not be a thing. And, obviously there are things that we have to do. For example, if you're a police officer and you're like, hey, I feel like I'm very suicidal, we need to take their gun. And that's what red flag laws are for. And, in law enforcement, it's different because they're a sworn law enforcement officer. So yes, you take their gun.
Right.
But, that takes us back to red flag laws and how they need to be written better. They need to actually make some damn sense, and they need to be enforced. And I think you said it perfectly. And I've even had friends and local supporters that have actually come to me with this, and they are avid. A lot of them are former military, former law enforcement. They are avid gun owners. They love their guns. But I even had someone tell me as soon as last week, I've been having I'm bipolar, and I've been having a lot of issues lately. And because of that, I turned my guns over, to my husband or another family member who locked them up in a place I don't have access to. I will get them back. They're still mine. I still own them. I love them. Sorry, work phone. but I can't, I don't trust myself right now. And, it's that is how red flag laws were supposed to be instituted, but they're never enforced and they're never used. And the Colorado red flag law is weak to begin with. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is that the principle of a red flag law has been in place for a long time. You think of it, a lot of times if police officers go on a domestic violence call and there are firearms in the home, they will seize those firearms temporarily. That happens all the time,
Right.
So it's another narrative issue. There's a lot of things that need to be done in terms of mental health, but I think one of the realistic things we start with is addressing that everyone has an inherent right to mental health care, and that there should always be services available. They should be affordable, if not free. They should be free, but we might have to take a few steps to get there. But they should definitely be affordable. The insurance companies should be mandated to cover them, just as they would have to cover your ER visit. And we should be equipped everywhere. It shouldn't be, I'm experiencing a crisis right now. Okay, I need to go all the way up to Denver or call an after hours line or call 911 and hope that there's a behavioral therapist or CIT certified person who can, come and help me, or hope that I get a paramedic who's not an asshole and doesn't have 20 other calls, holding right now. So I think it's really something that we need to be focusing on, is that there needs to be crisis centers everywhere, and the military, first responders, and every civilian, every person needs to have access to them. There shouldn't be any, show me your documentation, show me your ID, what's your place of employment. It should be, what's your name, you need help, okay, what's going on?
Right.
And I know for a fact Colorado has made a lot of progress in that area. As I understand it, at least, under Governor Polis, who I have my many disagreements with, but I do know that something I saw recently was that every juvenile in Colorado, I believe, can now get free mental health care from the state, and that's amazing. That's a perfect step forward, but we need to take it so much further, and that brings us into schools and education as well. We shouldn't have school counselors who are just glorified schedulers, right? Like, you should have actual psychiatrists in every school. You should have psychiatric nurse practitioners. You should have counselors, social workers, therapists, people who you can actually talk to, and who are legally protected. Especially as we see more and more school districts getting taken over by right-wingers, and very intentionally so. You just got to follow the money.
Yes.
And that's happening locally to us as well. Very unfortunately, it's a big thing in the Pikes Peak region. Yeah, and in Colorado Springs. So to have someone a kid, take me for example. When I was still in high school, I hadn't come out as gay yet. I was very depressed, very anxious. I was that very antisocial kid who just didn't talk to anyone, and I would just go sit by myself during lunch period because I couldn't even, I couldn't, I just couldn't talk to people. I couldn't be social. Like it was such a, I felt like I would just explode, right? Because I was going through all these mental things, but I didn't want to do anything about it. But with that being said, there really wasn't anyone to talk to. And obviously, you could easily say, well, there's always someone to talk to, right? You can always find someone. There's always, something. But every student should have an actual legally protected psychiatrist, mental health professional who has education and training in that area and can, sit down and have those tough conversations with kids. And I mean, we look at how many kids are killing themselves, and just, especially young gay kids. And it's an across the board issue, but and me personally, I've never had suicidal thoughts, but I've known a ton of people who have. And obviously I was a deputy in a jail, so I had to oversee suicide watch a lot and actually deal and intervene with active suicide attempts. And it's just, it's horrible. And every time I see it or hear about it or read about it, anything, I just constantly, we need to be doing more. And we need more funding, we need more access, affordability, we need more protections for people so that no one should have to worry about losing their job because they're willing to come forth and say, I'm having suicidal thoughts and feelings, or I've never felt this way before, I'm having anxiety, I need something. There's nothing wrong with that, and removing that stigma in all professions is something that we really need to be focusing more on.
Yes. No, I definitely agree. I've been trying to do that for quite a few years. And that goes back in my family forever. But that's a different story for a different day. When I talk about my grandfather being a professional baseball player, then I can talk about that.
Right.
Because my entire side of my mother's family, my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, were all killed by a drunk driver one night. And that led to, obviously some really horrible repercussions, which led to a very funny conversation that I had with my hopefully eventually soon to be son's in-laws that I had to reschedule this from because they were doing DoorDash and they're Trump people. And they didn't bring up that they were Trump people, but they brought up a lot of this. Oh yeah, we deliver like 2 Monster drinks, and another place was like 2 ice creams. I'm like, see, I told you, people that are getting high, they aren't driving. They're calling DoorDash.
Thank you.
They want ice cream. Exactly.
Right.
I've been telling that to people forever. I'm like, they're not sitting there. They're not like, Bob, you want some ice cream?
Let's go get it. Like, no.
Yeah. No. They're like, you want to call DoorDash? No, you call DoorDash. Oh, my phone's over there.
Right.
Your phone's right there. You call DoorDash.
And about
exactly.
2 hours later, someone will finally put the order in the middle, right after they got sniped in Call of Duty. So now they're pissed off. Yeah. This is my generation. I know.
Exactly. And I told him, I was just like, yeah. I said, they're high. That's what they're doing. And they started laughing. They're like, I know. And I'm like, Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Now we have common ground.
Right.
We can go from there. But they were laughing because they're making all this money off of DoorDash, off
Yep.
of people just ordering just an ice cream or something. And I'm like, well, you ought to think that the fact that we have legalized pot and Louisiana doesn't.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So I thought that was pretty funny. But that's also one of those things that could possibly help mental health. But I'm more curious as to whether or not it actually helps physical health. First off, because yeah, my running's going downhill real quick. I know, I'm like, oh my God, I died. And then there was one, I thought there was another. Oh, yes. This is where all young people, well, gosh, my husband too, they all want to end the two-party system. And I always think that's hilarious. Because I'm always like, yeah, no. I know it sounds like such a good idea,
Right.
and we would love to end the two-party system. It's just not going to happen. It's just not anytime soon.
Right.
It would be nice, but every time you vote for that third party, it's generally a libertarian or a very progressive candidate,
Right.
and it just always pulls away from the Democratic side,
Right.
and then that's where we end up, just shooting ourselves in our foot,
Right.
So you want to end the two-party system. How do you plan on doing that?
I do absolutely hate the two-party system, yes. But with that being said, if I could vote tomorrow to abolish, or if I could sign somewhere and just abolish the two-party system, hell yes, I would do it. But also, I definitely take your point on that as well. And, I've had to do some evolving as a candidate as well, to be perfectly honest, in that area. And to admit to myself, God, I hate the Democratic Party, but these people are crazy. And I'm like, at the end of the day, yes, I am running as a Democrat. And, I tweeted yesterday, I think it was, or it was the day before, and I basically said, I'm no fan of the Democratic Party, but here's what the Democrats are doing right now, or overall as a party, what we're supporting, that the Republicans aren't. And, immediately, it was actually a positive post for Democratic policies, but of course, people come out, and I always call them like the party fanboys and fangirls, because it's almost this just, and that's what I would say that's what I hate the most, is the idea that, if it's Democratic, it's perfect. If it's Republican, it's inherently evil. And it's just that these people who are so hyper partisan, to the point that it's not even about their philosophy or political values or compromise or bipartisanship. It's not about any of that. It's about, I'm a Democrat and I'm better than you, or I'm a Republican and I'm better than you. And what my big point on that is that, and someone raised this point to me recently, and I was like, well, that's a great point. It was, someone who's been a lifelong Democrat, and they basically told me, hey, at the end of the day, I like what you're doing, and I did tone it down a little bit, because I was getting a little crazy there for a little bit. I forgot to talk about my opponent's pitiful, horrible voting record, because I was too busy attacking Polis. But I was like, someone reached out to me and they're like, okay, you're not wrong. They're like, you're right. But if you want to ever have, you're wasting your political ammunition on someone who's not your opponent, and frankly is like all the way up here, if you get elected and get to the point where, yeah, maybe you can primary him one day, there you go. Then you can spend your political ammunition on Polis. And I was like, well, screw you, but that's a really good point. So So yeah, I mean, but someone else had raised the point to me recently. They were like, I basically what they said was, what I really like about candidates like you is that you're running as Democrats, but you're not running as Democrats just to be a Democrat, right? And the things that you're doing and the things that you're saying and the platform you have and the messaging you're putting out there, basically what she told me was, it makes me feel proud to be a Democrat because you're holding our party accountable to its values, right? And I think that in my opinion, that's something that we need to see more of. I've had to take this lesson to myself as well. Obviously, I'm not a fan of a two party duopoly, but I think at the same time, right now I am a Democrat, right? And maybe if one day we do have more third parties, or if we do, and I would love for that to happen, I'd be one of the biggest supporters of it. If that does happen, I probably wouldn't be a Democrat anymore. I'd probably be a member of the Progressive Party or a Labor Party or something of that nature. But still, with that being said, I think that it's not just about abolishing. I hate everyone wants to use the word abolish, but it's not about just abolish the two-party system. There are incremental steps that we can take to create a society that does and a governmental system that is a true representative democracy and doesn't have to be solely reliant on a two-party system. And one of the best ways that we can do that is through passing things like ranked choice voting, proportional representation, things of that nature. And I think that's a lot more of what we need to be focusing on, is not necessarily let's abolish the entire two-party system right now, because as you said, that's not going to happen. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Would I love for it to happen? Yes, but it's not. So instead, what are some realistic, feasible next steps that we can take? And one of those is ranked choice voting. One of those is proportional representation. One of those is ending political, party-based gerrymandering and things of that nature. So I think overall and that's something else that I wanted to touch on as well, is that just because you're a Democrat doesn't mean that you have to be 100% all the time a good, loyal Democrat. You can still be a person. And one of the things that I said when I, went to caucus to basically be nominated to run as the candidate for House District 21, I was like, the one thing, and I'm a brand new member of the of the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, but of the Democratic Party as of last year, right, late last year. And one of the things I was noticing during the caucus and assembly process, I was like, man, what I love about this is that we're also different. Like, we're also different. Like, there's conservative Democratic candidates. There's very moderate, centrist Democratic candidates. There's crazy-ass progressives like me. There's, there's everything. And obviously I have a lot of disagreements with a lot of other people in the party, but at the end of the day, I am proud to be a Democrat right now. And I think something to kind of caveat that with, though, is that you can be a proud Democrat and you can be a proud member of this party and you can be a candidate for this party, but you can still call out the party and call out members of the party when they're, more or less doing stupid shit. And, that needs to happen. That's how we hold them accountable. And something that a lot of people don't like to listen to me, but what I said about, I was there when the Trump nomination process was happening. I was there, I was in the process as a Republican. And what I try to warn people against is, however proud of a Democrat you might be, never hold your party loyalty above your principles and your values and what you know to be right. Because guess what? That's what I personally witnessed. So many good people who were Republicans, and I witnessed them do that. And I was told so many times, Kolten, as a delegate, you need to vote for national delegates who are going to vote for the sake of the party so that we can recapture the White House, so that we can recapture Congress. And I said, the hell I will, because at the end of the day, I vote for the soul of the party. I don't give a shit about the candidate. Right. And I think we have to protect the soul of the party over everything. Candidates come and go, right? Yes. People like me come and go. But at the end of the day, the spirit of the party, the philosophy of the party is what's going to endure. And it's up to us to ensure that it is representative of who we want the party to be. And, the party is still kind of, but it is still legally a democratic organization, right? So it's something I'll say is I'm not very popular among Democratic leadership in this county. I'm not very popular among the party infrastructure here. But guess what? I'm still on the damn ballot because I got nominated.
Right.
And I ran unopposed, but even if I had been opposed and I had won the primary, I won. I can say, at the end of the day, I can say whatever I want. Not saying I should or would, but I can,
Right.
So it's understanding that you might, and I had to learn this myself, you might absolutely hate the Democratic establishment, which I pretty much do.
Right.
But at the same time, you can say, yeah, but I'm right up here with you. I just got nominated too, so let's go.
Right. Right.
And it's worth noting that for a lot of the progressives and more leftist Democrats who don't show up because they're so pissed off with this system and they're so tired of corporate Democrats and corporate money and PAC money running the entire party just like it does the Republican Party, right? They're so sick of that, so they're like, screw it, I'm done. But the way that you get candidates like me into office, the way that you get propelled into a nomination and actually have a chance at seeking office, the way that you support progressive candidates and progressive visions and work to alter the party platform and to make it more representative of your values as a progressive or as a leftist or as a centrist or as whatever, is to be there when we caucus and is to sign up and be elected a delegate and go to those assemblies and be there with people like me. And this was my first assembly in this party, and I introduced a platform amendment to amend the party platform. And it was actually, funnily enough, to show our county parties support for a it was a bill at that time. I believe it was just signed into law by Governor Polis a few months ago. But it was basically to come out and support patients' rights above the hospitals and healthcare associations and all that, and basically saying that each patient has an inherent right to visitation. And this was actually something that was being supported by most of the Republicans in the state legislature and opposed and shot down by the Democrats. And so, me being me, I introduced what you could say was a Republican amendment to the party platform. But guess what? It passed.
Yes.
And the only reason that had been brought to my attention was that I take meetings with everyone.
Right.
And I had met with someone who was, a lifelong Republican. He had actually used to work at Focus on the Family, and, all that stuff. But he had found that he left that because he was like, that was too crazy for me.
Right.
So I'm out of that. But he was just overall, he's like, yeah, I'm very conservative. I'm still a Republican and all that. But I was like, well, tell me about, like, why... Because I had reached out to him. He founded the Never Alone Project, basically because his late wife died, and he wasn't able to visit her. And with COVID, it just got worse and worse and worse. So I was like, tell me more about this. And we had this deep conversation, and this was before the primary had even happened. We had this deep conversation about all of those things, and I was like, if I get elected, trust me, you will have my support 100% on this, because A, that's wrong, and B, I don't give a shit who gives money to who, or, what the party tells me to do. I will always vote for what the people's interests are. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care how conservative you are, how religious you are. You're right, and you should not have had to go through that. And it was funny, because I was like, so, like, what are we... I was talking to him, and I'm like, but the Democrats control both houses of the state legislature and the governorship, so why isn't this win anywhere? And he goes, Kolten, it's the Democrats that are opposing it. And I was like, what? and I was like, all right, tell me more. So we just kept going, and I mean, it did end up getting passed, I believe, in this state, or a version of it. But just little things like that, a brand new member to the Democratic Party who happened to also be the candidate for House District 21. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to write this up and submit it. And I did, and it passed. And a lot of people, I didn't put my name to it. I didn't claim credit for it or anything. It was actually funny when they were like going during the end of the assembly and they were going through all the platform items that had passed and the votes and all the, you know, housekeeping stuff. I was just kind of messaging some other key Democrats and candidates in the area, and they were like, where did that even, like, that's a good idea, where did that even come from? And I was like, oh, that was me. Yeah. They were like, what? They're like, when did you find the time to amend the party platform? And I was like, man, I don't know. I just figured. I was like, if the Democrats up at the state house don't want to support patients' rights, then I'll just put it on the damn party platform.
Exactly.
But that just goes to show, you know, show up. And decisions are made by those who show up. That's my favorite quote from The West Wing, you know? It's my favorite show ever, by the way.
Oh,
but decisions are made by those who show up.
Yes.
If you don't show up, you don't get to vote to nominate candidates like me over, you know, that corporate Democrat. You don't get to introduce and vote for platform amendments that move us towards being a more and more and more and more and more progressive leftist party. So you have to show up.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, I firmly believe the Democratic Party is actually a lot more progressive and leftist leaning than meets the eye. The reason that the party establishment is not that way is because we've done next to nothing to, as you know, as grassroots progressives, to show up and say, oh, don't worry, I saw how you voted that time. I saw all the money that you're taking from corporate interests and, you know, apartment associations and landlords and healthcare associations and all that. That's fine. We're going to primary you next year. Like, right. you just wait.
Right.
And that's a perfect, it's a perfect example to me. But how do people think that Trump and the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, took over the Republican Party? It did not start with Trump. It started with the Tea Party. Mm-hmm. And Trump was a non-issue. No one even... He was just the crazy dude from The Apprentice still. You know, no one in the Tea Party knew about Trump or cared about Trump. But it was that movement that started, and they started primary. It was a grassroots movement, yes. And it was... I disagree completely with its values, but that just goes to show that's how the Republican Party turned from what it was into what it now is. And what I see is that we have this Republican Party that's just going more and more and more and more and more every single day. It gets worse. Fringe right, you know, all just tinging on fascism now. And then the Democratic Party is pretty much kind of still staying a very moderate centrist party. Not our voting base, but the many of our candidates, many of our elected representatives are kind of these older establishment, corporate money-taking Democrats. But how do we fix that? We primary them.
Yeah.
We put candidates up. We amend the platform to be a more progressive platform. We start running more progressive candidates in every single district, every single election cycle. I'm running in House District 21. It's thought to be an unheard of red zone, but I'm sure as hell still running because someone has to, and we have to show up. And that goes to all young voters, all gay voters, all women voters, all minority voters, all voters in general. Like, if you are sick and tired of the way this party is operating and you want it to be better and you want to have more of a voice, jump in with us and get involved with it. And that's how we're going to be able, in my opinion, that's how we're going to be able to get these corporate Democrats that we all collectively hate. That's how we're going to get them out of office. And that's how we change the Democratic Party into the Progressive Party, into a truly labor party. If we want to, we don't even have to call it the Democratic Party anymore, right? But we have to get in those positions to make that happen. And contrary to popular belief, I do not believe that being a glorified centrist is the way to get elected either. I think people appreciate boldness. And I know and also think that there's a lot of people out there that they're so sick, and this is on both sides, yes. Libertarians especially, and independents as well. They're so sick of that typical political messaging of, okay, well, these are the three issues that are important to my community, so that's all I'm going to talk about. And
Right.
you know, here I have a 10-word answer for every single thing, and my polling data indicates this, so we're not going to do that. Yes, that would help millions of people, but we're not going to do it. And we're not going to talk about that either, because then I'm going to lose money from, you know, this association over here, and I need their money to win. No.
Right.
You know, I still think it's 100% possible, and I think that we need to be bold. And eventually, if they want to have any say in anything, they're going to have to support these campaigns. If there's enough of us out there that are saying, no, we're going to primary every single one of you. We are going to completely rewrite this party's platform, because guess what? We have the numbers and you don't. But to make that happen, we have to show up, and we have to actually do it, and we have to honestly have the balls to stand up and make those votes, and show up at caucus, and show up at, you know, party level meetings, and volunteer to be in party leadership, run for party leadership, you know, decide to run for public office, even the nightmare that it is, but it is, you know, it is worth it. And I think that there's a lot of more kind of establishment members of the local party here that I swear to God, every day they're probably like, why did we let that guy get nominated? Like, shit. But you know what? I love it, and I snuck in anyway. So, and you wouldn't believe, especially in this county, I think that the way for progressive candidates to win, or one of the ways, is not to run in these, you know, crazy blue, like Denver Metro, for example, districts. It's to run in these red districts where the party doesn't give you any help, won't give you any support, doesn't have any infrastructure, because guess what? That means they don't have any real candidates. So when you stand up, and if there were enough of us that stood up, each election cycle, that would make more and more of a difference, as those younger progressive voters go, I like that guy,
Right.
or I like that girl. You know, that. Are you sure you're a Democrat? Like, you know, and that's perfectly fine. We need to do more of that. We have to show up. We have to make our voices heard, and that's how we're going to change the system. And that is, I think I don't know if you heard what I said earlier on, you know, the two-party system. If we want to end the two-party system, that's one of the ways we do it. Is by getting into the position where we can actually say, okay, now I want ranked choice voting to happen. You know, that's something that I'm 100% in support of.
Yes.
I want proportional representation to happen. I want us to change the formulas on how we, you know, assign representation, because not only is it stupid and inaccurate and very partisan based, even though they say it's not, but it is. But at the same time, it's so unrepresentative of people, and that's one of the big issues that I've seen recently. Reading over a bunch of research for, you know, the proportional, it's like the proportional democracy system, or I can't remember exactly what it's called. But I've talked to a bunch of leaders from that movement and that organization, which is based out of Colorado, actually. It's Colorado Best Democracy, I believe. But basically, looking at all the mathematical formulas, and I suck at math. I just read the articles. I didn't do them, because I don't do math. But you know, just reading through all the research and all the formulas and all that, and I think the biggest issue that people have, including me, with the two-party system, is that it creates a system of representation where it's basically 50%, right? So the ratio of representation remains at 50%. It's Republican or Democrat. I can vote for the Libertarian, I can vote for the Independent or Green Party or Communist Party or Socialist Party, but they're not going to win. So I've gotten myself nowhere, right? But I think that the incremental steps we can take to getting to a point where we maybe will one day have multiple parties, and we will have, you know, different set says in government, and we will have to actually build coalitions and talk to each other. Imagine that, to have government, you know, is to start looking at what we can do now. We can't walk into the state house tomorrow and abolish the two-party system, because, like you said, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. What we can do, though, we can pass ranked choice voting. We can work on creating. We can pass legislation to create a state commission on proportional representation, and how we can change the formulas of representation, so that, you know, instead of I think one of the best ways to look at it is on the federal level, where you have one representative in the U.S. House who's representing about 700,000 to over a million people. There
Yes.
is no way that one person can represent that many people in any effective way whatsoever, and that's why on both parties they're all corporate bought out cronies half the time,
Yeah.
because no one else can get in there. And even on the state level, it's very unfortunate because, in my district, I'm looking at 100,000 to a little bit over 100,000 for one representative. And it's not, how am I going to take meetings with 100,000 people? How am I going to field 100,000 phone calls? And obviously, most people aren't contributing and they don't want to be active in this democracy. But if we look at other countries that, a lot of them have parliamentary systems, and I'm not saying we should have a parliamentary system or anything like that, but you look at these other systems of government, but the way that they formed their political parties, where there has to be so much coalition building to actually form a government. But not only that, their levels of representation are not representation, but like the proportions of representation are so much lower, which is actually good because that means they're looking at like 5 to 7% compared to our 50, right? So it means instead of me having Democrat or Republican, I have all these parties and I can vote for, say I really am 100% in favor of the Socialist Party in this country. So I vote for the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party gets, I don't know how many votes, but say they get a few seats in the parliament still, and that's where proportional representation and ranked choice voting in the long term would really start to change our entire democracy, so that more and more and more and more people want to get involved because they feel that they actually have a voice. Because right now it's okay, I'm one vote out of 100,000, right? So who cares? If I call my representative, I get a staff member who doesn't give a shit. If I send him an email, I get a genuine copy and pasted response. And so obviously I'm running to be a different type of representative, but there's only so much we can do. And that's only on the state level, right? So if you really want to build a proportional democracy, which we do, where everyone wants to get involved, we have to give them, I mean, obviously everyone can get involved now, but there are steps that we can take to make our democracy more representative, more progressive, and more proportional, to where instead of having 435 members in the U.S. House of Representatives who are each representing 700,000 over a million people, we can lower that level of representation to a degree where it's more manageable and they can actually have more discussions with people and actually, do their job, which is literally to represent the interests of the people in their communities. And that's even more exaggerated on a state election as well.
Exactly. And it gets frustrating. I find myself frustrated all the time. And I've been telling the younger generation forever to please start running, because we've gotten to the point where it's almost a nuclear option. It's
Right.
Now we've got everybody that, as you said, we've got Democrats in both our state, Senate and the House, and as a governor. But there are a lot of states that have Republican Senates, Republican House, Republican governors, that now are changing the way that our presidents are. The people are voting. So even if if their population votes for a Democratic president, they can go and just say, "Oh, no, we've just decided we're going to go do this," and God love my kids, but I wish they would stop complaining about everything and just go out and do something. And
Yeah.
and that's why I love the fact that you are actually going out there and doing something and encouraging other young people to go out there and do it as well. And as you said, run the way you want to run your campaign. So it's your campaign. And by the way, I love the British parliamentary system. I would.
It's awesome.
I would. That would be me. If I could sit there and yell at people all day long.
See, so many people have not watched British sessions of Parliament to realize that is how you get people involved in government. Like, oh my god, you watch Congress for 5 minutes and you're like, this is boring as shit. You watch the British Parliament debating literally any issue. It's not, they're not even hot button issues, and they're like throwing shit across the chamber, and you're like, see, this is why British people are involved in their system. It's, we're just building off of all of that. I think that overall, there's a lot of things to be inspired about lately, and I'm pretty much a pessimist a lot of the time. Personally, I'm always gonna look at things and be like, really? Like, how the hell did that happen? Like, seriously? Like, and then even being a candidate, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go talk some major shit right now. Like, this is you done did it now. and but just overall, like, I try to remind myself to be optimistic. And there's so many people who are just kind of checking out, whether they're kind of actively or passively doing it. And first off, it's 100% okay to take those mental health breaks from politics. God knows we all need them. Just like you need to take breaks from work and social media and all that. But I've seen a lot of stuff recently that just I try to keep in the back of my head of there's a lot of young candidates that are coming out from across the country. I mean, some are as young as 18, in states where you can run at 18, which right. I think is how it should be. But,
yes.
If you're an adult, you're an adult. But,
right.
There's so many young candidates. There's more openly gay candidates. There's more black and Hispanic and female candidates than ever. And it's just going to show that I think we're on the precipice right now, kind of like what I was talking about earlier. I really think we're on the precipice of reform in our entire party. And I was kind of back and forth when I was, had first gotten nominated, and I was just, I was taking all this flack from, the proud, lifelong, Democratic establishment here and everywhere, and I was just like, you know what? I was so pissed off. I was like, you know what? Watch me flip this district just because I can, first off. And second off, watch me change my affiliation to unaffiliated just because you pissed me off. And then, and now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna stop being that guy. I'm like, no, I will be staying in this party. Because, like I said earlier, I really think we have such a good chance to take this party back for the people, but more so to encourage more participation in our democracy overall, right? I mean, we were just talking about ranked choice voting. We were just talking about proportional representation, not being afraid to look at the data, look at the statistics. There's so many people that are coming out in force nowadays because they're seeing what's actively happening to our country, what's happening to our communities, what's happening to our school boards. I mean, for God's sake, our school boards are being stacked with corporate, special interest funded religious nationalists. I mean, I think it was I want to say it was District 11 here, that there was a young gay kid that was in, I think he was in middle school. It was either middle school or high school, and he had emailed a member of the board of education basically just saying, I'm struggling with my sexuality, and are there any resources, and and he was basically told you're a sinner by a sitting member of a school board, and I think we have to show that that's what's at stake, that's what's at stake this election and every election, and we have to be willing to put the people into office who are willing to call both sides out on it. Honestly, that's what I think we need. I mean, and I said this recently, because someone was like, okay, well, you say a lot of stuff about how much the Dems piss you off a lot of times, but do you still vote blue? And I was like, was that even a question? Of course I still vote blue. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to vote for Polis, even though I would love to primary him. Like, and of course I'm going to, I'm going to vote for Bennett, even though I can't stand him. Like, I'm still, I'm still going to vote blue. I think you actually put it the best during our one-on-one meeting a few weeks ago, or whenever that was, because you made it great. You were like, I vote blue all the way every time. But most of these people don't get my money.
Yes.
And they don't get my support. And they don't get to come on my podcast. And I'm not going to talk about how I like them, because screw them, but yeah, I'll still vote for them.
Yes.
And that's where I'm at as well. It's at the end of the day, yeah, the lesser of two evils argument sucks, and I hate having to use it, and I want to be one of those people to get in there and try and reinvigorate this movement to change things and change our party overall. But with that being said, right now, it's, you just look at what's happening in all these other states. Look at what's happening in our, the Supreme Court, for God's sake. And it's just, there's so many things that are going on that people don't understand, and that's okay, because it's really hard to understand politics in this country, right? Because there's about 1 million different spins on every issue, and half the data is even skewed half the time. So, just keeping an open mind, and especially for younger people and younger voters, and there's a lot of voters that are going to be turning 18 or have just turned 18, seniors in high school, freshmen in college. This is going to be their first election, and I think that we're seeing a lot of people who are seeing what's actually happening, from the Roe v. Wade ruling to destroying the Miranda rights, to what a lot of the red states are doing, to as well what a lot of the blue states are not doing, and they're looking at that and going, you know what, I need to get more involved. I am going to register to vote. My sister, who hates, doesn't give a shit about politics, but she's a lesbian, and she's younger than me. She's 18 or 19. She may have just turned 19. I forget a lot of things. But she's a near professional dancer, and all that stuff, and she has a girlfriend and all that, and she was, before I'd actually been nominated, and I was just thinking about it, it was my mom actually that had put it to me this way. She was like, well, you have to think about your sisters. You have to think about, people, and my parents aren't political either. You have to think about your sisters. You have to, and this was before Roe had came out.
Right.
You have to think about all those gay kids who still have no one to talk to and nowhere to go, and, yeah, there's resources, but they don't know where they are or how to get to them. God forbid their parents are, hate them for being gay, or, they don't feel safe coming out to them, and just look what's happening in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill and things like that, and it's progressively getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and we have to stand up and we have to do more. And that's the reason I decided to really run, because originally, after I had gotten the nomination. I was running unopposed in the primary, so I was on the ballot. And I had actually decided to suspend my campaign, because I was just so sick of, I was getting attacks from every single side, right? The Democrats are like, you're not a good enough Democrat, and the Republicans are like, well, you're a crazy socialist, and and so I was just like, you know what, screw it, whatever, like, I don't have any allies. And then it was funny, because Roe had come out, I want to say the week before that decision had come out, and that got me thinking. I was like, primaries next week. And I was still on the ballot,
right.
Because I had suspended my campaign but not withdrawn my campaign. The plan was to withdraw my formally withdraw from the election right after the primary, so that the party could, form the vacancy committee and put someone in my place to run against a Republican. And I was like, okay, well, this just happened, and then the primary results came out, and I got like 300 or so more votes than the last Democrat that ran off cycle. So in like I think that was 2018 or something, last off cycle election. So 2018, and I had picked up like near 400 more votes than she had.
Yeah.
So I was like, is that a sign?
Yeah.
And then, the same thing kept coming to me. And obviously Roe had just came out the week before. And I was like, man, I have two sisters.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I'm an openly gay guy, and yeah, I can hold my own. I was a cop. I'll fight anybody. But at the same time, I'm like, man, there's so many people who are just so scared right now, and it's so sad that we still have to have that discussion. And so then, me being me, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna run. I don't care if the Democrats don't like it. The Republicans are sure as hell gonna hate it. But I don't care what the Democrats think. I'm running. Guess what? You already nominated me, and I won the primary by myself. So, we're gonna play this game now.
Exactly.
And
bring it on.
And so here I am right now, and like I said at the beginning of this podcast, it's not even about winning to me. Obviously, if I win, that would be an honor, and I think it would go so far to showing what young progressive candidates can do, who aren't taking corporate money and aren't taking any. I don't take any money from anyone that's not an individual. I don't. I don't even take labor union money, and I love labor unions. And I actually had a meeting with one of the organizers that he's awesome. Of one of the state unions, and we were talking, and he was like, so I'm just curious, because I've been a union organizer my whole life, and different unions. He's like, why don't you take our money? Because you are like the most, he's like, I could get you this endorsement. You could, with your platform, you could so easily get endorsements and money from these organizations. Why don't you do it? And I said, you know what? The reason I don't do it is because I shouldn't have to be bribed to vote in favor of labor. Guess what? I'll do that organically.
Right.
And I think, and unfortunately, we've seen that with a lot of our elected Democrats on the state level, where the collective bargaining bills just consistently get killed, and then we will see kind of some really watered down like PR based bill go out that really doesn't do anything, but gives that little nudge to the unions, like, hey, just so you remember, we're still better than the Republicans. And so, it's just, that's, I think if we, well, I know if we win down here, it's gonna go so far to showing that money doesn't have to run your campaigns. And you don't have to take money from anyone and everyone and go seek out all the endorsements and fill out all the questionnaires and make sure you knock on every single door. It's so much of it is just about being who you are. And people on both sides are sick and tired of cookie-cutter political candidates who do everything that they do based on a pre-written 10-word spiel, and it's just all crap. And everyone knows it's crap. It's that whole thing when you read candidates' platforms, and you're like, that didn't tell me anything. And then you ask them, you're like, okay, so you're in favor of, like, housing as a human right. Yeah. Well, what are you going to do? Well, and it's I think that's something that we really need to focus more on, is what are you actually going to do? And I love when people ask me that, and I especially love when people ask me that when I have no clue what I'm going to do, because I haven't thought of that yet. And then I'm like, okay, so we're going to get coffee, and we're going to talk about how legislatively we could probably accomplish this. And, I mean, there's so, like, I just love being creative in that legislative mind, whether I get elected or not, but just thinking of what could we reasonably do to cool down the housing market? What could we reasonably do to institute rent control that won't end in every landlord in the state selling their property to the point that the entire system crashes, right? Because it is possible. We have to be creative with these things. So when and I've been at fault of it all the time too, and I've been trying to get better. But we like to put out these just vague generalities, right? Instead of, okay, yes, healthcare's a right, housing's a right, mental health is a right. What are you gonna do? What are you actually gonna do? And I've called out a lot of Democrats on that as well recently. As soon as the Supreme Court decision came down on Roe, I was like, hey, did everyone know that in Colorado gay marriage is still illegal? And everyone, including pretty much all the other candidates I know who are also Democratic candidates, were like, no, it's not. Like it's perfectly legal in Colorado. I was like, no, it's only legal in Colorado because that Supreme Court ruling hasn't been rescinded yet. You read the Colorado Constitution, it's a very homophobic document. But people don't think of that, and that there's so much more work to do. We passed the little Democrats passed the Reproductive Health and Equity Act, and it was signed by Governor Polis and all that, and it is a good bill, and it does establish Colorado as a sanctuary. Well, law now, it's not a bill anymore; it's a law.
Yeah.
But it does establish Colorado as a sanctuary state. And, obviously Governor Polis issued executive orders. Our Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, said that we will not extradite for any abortion-related crime or anything of that. And that's awesome. But what we have to remember is that there's always more that we can be doing. So, we need to be holding our own party accountable, and we need to be electing people who are willing to say, okay, we passed the Reproductive Health and Equity Act. Why is that not a constitutional provision, right? Why is that not a constitutional provision? Why do we not have legislation on the governor's desk right now because I dare him to veto it, that says
Exactly.
that says gay marriage is an inherent human right, and not even gay marriage is an inherent human right, and I don't care as long as it's a human, you're good.
Yes. Exactly.
And it's an of age human, you're good.
Yes.
So
Yes.
and that's it. And there's so much work to be done, and being willing to stand up and say, okay, the Republicans I don't even know what they're doing over here. We control the state. What are we doing? Why is it that teachers still don't have rights to collectively bargain in Colorado? Because they really don't. That was one of the things that got taken out of the very watered down collective bargaining bill that they passed. But watch the votes and realize that not all Democrats are the same, just like not all Republicans are the same, even though they're really trying to kind of assimilate their entire party into like some weird artificial Jesus intelligence thing. But it's like
I don't even know. It almost hasn't become, even two parties anymore. It's battling for the soul of the country. And as you said, you're listening to Republicans as well. And I really feel that, everyone that is down there in your district, that if they really want to read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and everything that goes along with it, that they're going to see that that's what you're fighting for. And if that's not what they're not reading, then that's something else nefarious that whoever else that lady is, that maybe might be a better choice.
right.
But really to challenge them, because like I said, a lot of them are military, but as you mentioned, a lot of them are police officers, EMTs, teachers. I mean, you're going to have teachers down there, you're going to have contractors, and, they really need to read the Constitution and see that this is what we want America to be. Yes, we want the progressiveness that we have built up throughout the last 250 years. We certainly don't want to go back to 1857, which is what the Supreme Court did.
Yeah, oh my God.
But, keep moving forward.
Yep.
And there is that argument, like I told my husband, I can understand you want to rein in government. That's a conservative argument. Liberals want to, spend a little more. That's a liberal argument.
Right.
We can all have these discussions. But first, let's get America back into the hands of every I shouldn't even say real American, to every American that believes in the Constitution and everything that we have fought for, because I have a direct line to the American Revolution. I had relatives, direct line, that fought on the wrong side of the Civil War. So is
Me too.
Gordon. Um,
Yeah.
but he also, the American Revolution, I take him very both seriously, and the
Yeah.
military very seriously. I didn't do anything for you, but I endorse you. Well, I've talked your ear off anyways, so yeah, I mean, coming from I don't know if this is good or bad, coming from a lifelong liberal who grew up in a nuclear free zone, married a military husband who was a Green Beret, and then had one that was killed overseas. Um, and like you said, we met under not the best of terms on Twitter, but you sat down, talked with me, and I love your platform, and I readily endorse you one way or the other. I'm going to put you out there to everyone, and um, I'll I don't live down there, so I can't vote for you.
Well, thank you. I did actually get endorsed by, and this is the funny part. She's traditionally endorsed Republicans until recently, but she did endorse our coroner, Leon Kelly, who I would endorse as well, because I don't even know why the Democratic Party here tried to run someone who has no credentials against the coroner. But don't even get me started on that, because I was in that assembly and I was like, abstain? That's stupid. I was like, I can't vote no, so I'll just abstain now. But yeah, it's funnily enough, she lives down here. She the El Paso County 20, I want to say 2020 Veteran of the Year, for El Paso County, Skylar Nelson. She actually, yeah, she's amazing. She actually came out and endorsed me. And it was funny because she's, in the past, but she's nonpartisan. It's for her. And she works in the mental health field, specifically mental health for military and military families. And it was funny because my opponent was trying to court her endorsement, I'm pretty sure. And she tells me, like, she messages me on Facebook, and she's like, yeah, she was, basically saying, like, oh, well, I'm pro mental health too, and, yada yada. And she's like, no, I actually already endorsed Kolten. And I'm just like, I'm like, that is the best thing ever, right? Like, and I mean, it's just goes to show, like, you don't have to be a Republican to be pro military, right? You don't have to be a Republican to be pro police. It's just that all these narratives have been so hijacked. Me saying that I'm pro-military doesn't mean I'm pro-invading Iraq, right? Because at the end of the day, the troops didn't give that order. No, they didn't. And they don't have any other choice. And same thing with law enforcement. There's so many issues, and yes, there is a ton of systemic racism in the entire system, and it's so broken, but we like to use these are line patrol officers, and granted, there are a lot of bad ones, but there's a lot of good ones too. And we like to just characterize them all as just, oh, well, you're all horrible people, ACAB, and, F the police, and we just need to, there's this whole abolitionist movement now about just abolishing the entire police force, which is, I'm not one of those people. I'm actually, it's a funny thing that I am pretty much aligned with, like, the Democratic Socialists on everything platform-wise, and then you hit that, and I'm like, nope. And I'm like, nope. I'm like, no, you don't get to tell someone who carried a badge and a gun and took an oath, that, no, you don't get to tell me that. And I think that that's a thing as well, is, no, I wasn't in the military. I was only a cop for a year, but I think a lot of times it does come down to saying, when you're talking to veterans, when you're talking to law enforcement, saying, I took the oath too. because I did. I took 2 oaths to become a deputy sheriff. I swore on my badge. Yeah, I swore on God, even though I wasn't religious. I'm not that much of an asshole to, launch an entire protest over an oath. But, it was, yeah, I mean, I swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Colorado and all the laws therein, and yeah, I did that, and I proudly did that, and I've gotten in so many like little tussles with people who agree with me on everything, and then they're like, "But you like the police," and I'm like, it's not even about liking or disliking the police. It's about saying you can't sit here and say that you're representing minority communities who are, just often selected and singled out for little tiny problems, and then you're doing the exact same thing to an entire profession. Right. And I actually brought that up recently because someone was just going off about how much they hate police, and I was like, okay, I love the military too. We all know that. I was like, why you guys always attack the police, but you don't attack the military? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, it's the same thing. I was like, that's what proves to me this is just a PR stunt. And there's too many things nowadays that are just PR stunts. And, it's possible to be a progressive Democrat who believes in law and order and is, pro law enforcement overall, but is also willing to say, okay, the system is severely broken. I've seen it. I know it. The statistics and the data prove it. Let's bring everyone to the table and figure out how we can fix it, rather than us all just sitting here and crying about it and blaming the other people for all the problems we have. So,
yeah. So, as you said, it's just coming together, having these conversations, and getting the work done. It's not easy, and the problem is, as you've mentioned, we've been sitting here sleeping, most of us just sleepwalking through democracy or a republic.
Yep.
And now it's on fire, and we're looking at the young kids saying, okay, can you guys go please put this out for us? And that's not right.
Right.
And that's not right of us to do.
Yeah.
So the least we can do is support you guys. And, like I said, I'm not going to support everybody. I'm going to vote blue. I'm not going to support everybody. But I support you. And you're in good company, whether you want to believe so or not. I won't list people because then people might not like you. There we go. But anyways, I'll let you get back to work because I took up so much of your time today. I thank you so much for sitting down, talking to me or with me. And if you ever want to come on again, just let me know. Otherwise, thank you. Like I said, thank you. I was so excited to have you on here today. So,
of course, thank you for having me. It's awesome.
Anytime. I was super excited to have you on here today. So, to everybody out there in TV land, Kolten Montgomery, yes. He follows, Veterans Overland. I told you about my friend that was the Olympian. Veterans Overland also works with veterans and suicide. So I just did one on them, and I'll put up that information, not the veterans, but also the veteran that you were talking about, the veteran suicide hotline for you. That's at awesome. The end of this.
Thank you.
And your little platform thing. And we'll get that done. All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Bye.
See ya.